Paul was a man who loved life and lived it fully. He and Melissa had 4 children and a grandchild, and for Paul, family meant everything. Paul loved life, his family, his garden, and building things with his hands. He found joy in simple pleasures. Even in his final days, he was surrounded by love, doing the things he treasured most. That was Paul, full of life and deeply loved.
Paul was just incredible. He was just the nicest person. Never complained, just got on with life. Paul was 63 when he died. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was devastating for the family.
Surgery and months of treatment kept Paul's cancer at bay, but it returned, spreading to his lungs and eventually throughout his body.
He really wasn't very well, and he wasn't picking up the way he should have been picking up. And eventually, we weren't getting answers from anyone. Didn't matter where we took him, everybody said he's fine. And eventually, in desperation, we took him to A&E in the Royal. And that's where we got the final diagnosis that the cancer just had spread everywhere. And he lived for about 6 weeks after that. When they suggested that we would speak to a palliative care doctor, and that was the first acceptance, right? This is palliative care now, this isn't curative, it's palliative care. And then when the syringe drive went up and the district nurses were coming, I think at that stage the hospice nurse became involved. But we very quickly realised we needed this hospice nurse. She was our first port of call for everything. In probably the last 6 weeks of Paul's life, anything that went wrong, anything we weren't happy with, it was the hospice nurse that we contacted, and she was brilliant. I knew that Paul wanted a dad at home, and we wanted him at home. So we hadn't really thought about hospice. Palliative care was different because at the stage that palliative care was introduced, we knew it was palliative, it wasn't curative. And I think, well, that's a preconception that maybe people have, that they hear palliative care and they think it's the end. But it isn't always the end. Palliative care was going to make him as comfortable as he could be made. And we were quite accepting of that.
Paul became progressively more ill. Ursula, the community nurse specialist, suspected terminal delirium, first thought to be an infection, but soon said it was terminal. Melissa realised she could no longer care for him at home, for his dignity and her own well-being, and Ursula called to say a hospice bed was available.
And when Ursula phoned and said she'd got the hospice bed, it was like manna from heaven. So I explained to Paul where we were going, and he was content. I think he knew himself that this was the right thing. And from we went in through the door of the hospice, it was like a peace descended on us. Paul too, Paul's shoulders relaxed. He just knew this is the place to be. And then before we went in, one of the nurses said, you go from being his carer to being his wife again. And the children go from caring for him to being children. And he was as happy as he could have been under the circumstances. And so were we. I think it was the Monday. I was exhausted. And I'd said to the girls, or the staff, you know, I'm going to get into bed beside him. And we managed, they moved him across the bed, let me get in bed beside him. I had a glass of wine with him. It was lovely. And I just lay down then, and I was asleep beside him when he died. It was so nice. Now, we were all there, but it couldn't have been nicer. Really couldn't. But he was as content as he could have been under the horrific circumstances that led up to his death. So we honestly couldn't have asked for a better death.
Volunteer, donate or fundraise. Every action helps support patients and families at Northern Ireland Hospice. Discover how you can make a difference. Visit nihospice.org/get involved.